Center in Liberal, Kansas. And today we have a webinar, Working on Your Business When You Can't Work in Your Business. And I'd like to introduce to everyone Eric Mercer, who is our Dodge City Business Advisor, and he is an IO psychology practitioner. And I'm going to hand it over to Eric to give a little bit of background. Eric?
Okay, thank you, Maria. Well, hello and good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining the webinar, Working on Your Business When You Can't Work in Your Business. My name is Eric Mercer, and I am a business advisor with the Kansas Small Business Development Center. I'm also a small business owner specializing in organizational development and consulting, executive coaching, training, and selection methods. I have a master's degree in industrial and organizational psychology. And for those who aren't familiar with IO psychology, it basically applies the methods, models, and principles of psychology to organizations and the people who work there. Now, I can't speak for all of you, but for me, sometimes it feels like we've entered some kind of tunnel with a relatively normal and a certainly familiar landscape in plain view when we went in, but not knowing what the landscape will look like when we come out the other end. Now, there's a lot of predictions of what the new landscape might or might not look like, but the truth is we really won't know for sure until we're there. However, this doesn't mean that we can't take steps to plan for it, just that we might want to ensure that our plans are adaptive and flexible, since our landscapes will very likely continue to change. It's my sincere hope that everyone will find something helpful in what I'm presenting today for yourself, your organization, and preferably both. The goal here is to provide tools and information that businesses and organizations can use to plan for the future, no matter where they might be working right now. Okay, give me just a second. My slide is not progressing. There we go. Okay, sorry for that little hiccup. All right, solving problems successfully is an important and integral part of all business, which I'm sure you all know. And it makes it a necessary skill for all employees, no matter what level they're at. In everyday life, problems often have multiple solutions, usually with more complex problems having more solutions. So finding the solution that works best in a given situation might require creativity. Actually, it definitely will require creativity. And the ability to also differentiate between a perceived problem and the real problem. So people are some of the most critical resources in any organization or business. And at the same time, systematic approaches to workforce planning are still in kind of the early stage. They're still evolving. So success in workforce planning strategies is going to rely on the quality and caliber of many different interrelated activities. The overall objective is to produce a wiser and more efficient use of people at all levels of a business. So we're going to start off with creative problem solving. Problem solving and strategic planning, I feel, really complement each other quite well. Problems can often be solved through the use of planning. And we're going to start off here just with the 7 habits of highly effective people, because I feel this kind of sets the tone for what we're going to be getting into. The most effective problem solvers, they often develop mindsets and habits to assist them with both difficult and challenging problems. Now, Stephen Covey's research on highly effective people, it revealed that most effective people tend to adopt similar habits. So we're just going to take a quick look through the ones that are up on the screen here. Take the initiative and be proactive. Basically make things happen. Actively seek out new ideas and innovations. Don't let a negative environment influence behavior and decisions. So work on the things you can actually do something about. And if you make a mistake, acknowledge it, learn from it, and move on. Start with the results in mind. Know what the objective or goals are and take steps to fulfill them. So basically, determine what the first step or steps are, and then kind of determine the best way to work on accomplishing them. Prioritize important tasks. It's important to actually list the top priorities that we have, whether it's for the day or the week, or sometimes even for a year. Writing them down will actually help us to kind of understand and review, prioritize these. We'll discuss this concept a little bit later as well. So the next one is take a win-win perspective. Win-win is basically a mindset that seeks mutual benefits for everyone involved in the solution or agreement. And it's important here to identify key issues and results that would provide a fully acceptable solution to everyone. Maybe not what everyone had in mind, but something everyone finds acceptable. Understand yourself, then understand other people. So learn as much as possible about the situation and the people involved. And really, I don't know if I can say this enough, but listen, 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 listen. Try to see the problem from other people's perspective. Remember to be adaptive and flexible when you're trying to be understood. Not everybody receives information in the same way, and not everybody's going to understand exactly what we're talking about the first time we tell them. And then the last one, the second to last one, work together. So basically what this is talking about is making the whole greater than the sum of its parts. To really value the differences in everyone that's involved. Try to foster open and honest communication and really help everyone bring out the best in everyone else. It doesn't do any good to work against each other because that actually is less effective in the long run, sometimes the short run. The last one is just practice renewal. And really what that's talking about is kind of 4 elements. So there's the physical part of our being, and we can think of things like stress management, prioritizing our health. Then there's the cognitive, our mind, and we can visualize what we want, we can think about it, which we'll get into in the next slide. Growth is kind of when we clarify our values, our commitment, what's important to us. And then the social and emotional perspective is basically developing those interpersonal relationships, the relationships with other people, both in our business and outside of our business. All right, critical thinking, especially structured critical thinking, can be very helpful in not only problem solving, but in my opinion, really being creative in problem solving. So for those of you that aren't familiar or you want a refresher, critical thinking is basically a process. It can be used to recognize underlying assumptions that we have. We can analyze arguments, question, problem statements or solutions, and we can also interpret and kind of assess how accurate the information is that we're receiving. Structured critical thinking, it can be vital to very effective and good problem solving. So you can kind of think of it as a disciplined art. It basically ensures that you're using the best thinking you're capable of in all circumstances. So the general goal is to try to figure out the lay of the land or understand the changing landscape. We all have multiple choices to make on a daily basis, both in our own personal lives and our businesses. And we need the best information in order to make the best choices. So step one is really to identify all of the conclusions. So a conclusion here, we're just saying, is a statement or idea. It could be in a document, it could be in a blog, it could be online, it could be a speech somebody's giving, can be this presentation. And really what it is it's the statement that somebody or something wants you to accept. So make a list of the conclusions that are presented, whatever it might be. And that helps us to kind of identify those conclusions. Step two is look for the reasons and evidence used to support each conclusion. So here there's an important distinction between reason and evidence. So reasons are internal evaluations that we really, they can be based on facts in actual data, but they're not necessarily well substantiated. A lot of times reasons are based on our feelings, our personal experiences, things we've observed, or our general beliefs. So a lot of times evidence, though, is it's usually something that's given in support of a conclusion, and it's usually a little more substantiated. It allows us to kind of, it's based basically on external evaluations. So like facts, data, laws, case examples, research findings, those kind of things are generally considered evidence. Step three is list all major assumptions. Okay, so an assumption here we're just saying is basically a belief that people use to support evidence. So we can also make a list of those assumptions. And we can look for either hidden or unspoken assumptions. You know, for example, let's say that, I'll just give an example that I personally experienced from the person that this happened to. So an employee reported to his manager that his work team just wasn't working well. It wasn't functioning well. They were conflicting. And he just spoke generally kind of about friction between members of the team. Well, the supervisor said she'd look into it, but she also noted that just prior to the complaint, a new member had come onto the team. So kind of her hidden assumption there was that since the complaint and the new member's arrival coincided, there must be a connection. And so she transferred the new member to a different team and was kind of surprised when it turned out that the group continued to have communication problems and not work well together. So we need to be aware of the assumptions that are either being made or that we're making ourselves. The next one is evaluate all the assumptions and evidence. So now that we have the assumptions and evidence, we have to evaluate them to determine whether it's a strong or weak. And that's in connection to the conclusion. Step five is just identify fallacies in logic. Pretty much what that means is we're looking for anything that doesn't quite fit. When we're evaluating the assumptions or the evidence that's used to support the conclusions, we just want to see if there's anything going on there that we can kind of spot to see that it isn't really what it seems to be. So here talking about creative problem solving. So creative problem solving, it uses a structured approach to solving issues and challenges as they arrive, but it also allows for a pretty high level of flexibility to approach the problem in new ways. So that's kind of the key difference between just regular problem solving and creative problem solving. Creative problem solving tends to be a little more flexible so that we can come up with new ways of interpreting what's happening and try to come up with new solutions that maybe haven't been done before. To do this, a helpful way I found is to use a what's called a problem-solving heuristic. And basically, that's just a systematic approach that helps kind of guide us through the solution process. And it also allows us to generate alternate solution pathways. So while a heuristic can't really prevent people from making errors, that may always happen, but it does provide a uniform, very systematic approach to deal with kind of any problem that comes up. So the information on this slide is based on McMaster's 5-point strategy. So if anyone's familiar with that, this will probably seem very familiar to them. So I'll just go through these relatively quickly here, but in problem definition, the first step is it can resurface at any time during the problem-solving process. So don't think of these as a linear step-by-step process. Many times these will happen again and again, and some, like defining the problem, may pop up at different points as new problems sometimes are uncovered as we're working through this. So first we gather information and we use it, then we use it in several specific techniques, which we're going to discuss in the upcoming slides. And once you've defined the real problem, you can kind of proceed to the next step. One of the most popular techniques used in business, and I'm sure all of you have used it, is to generate ideas, is just brainstorming. And there's a few other methods as well. You can also use futuring or analogies to kind of help generate those solutions. Sometimes you can ask questions like, what is or is not possible? You know, has this problem been solved before? Is it something I want to solve? Is it something worth solving? So in potential problem analysis, you plan to ensure the success of your decision by identifying that pretty much anything that could potentially go wrong. Now, keep in mind, you may always miss something, but what this does is it allows us to kind of analyze the cause of each potential problem and take preventative steps or actions in order to kind of either keep them from happening or mitigate them if they do happen. So having made the decision and planned for its success, you can then implement the solution. The first implementation step is to plan the activities you're going to need to perform to solve the problems. The evaluation phase after you kind of come up with a solution, you look back and you make sure all of the criteria and the problem statements were fulfilled, and that none of the kind of the constraints that you put on that solution were violated. The evaluation phase is carried out at both the end, but also during the whole heuristic here. As I mentioned, some of these are going to be ongoing. So especially when major decisions are made or when maybe a branch in our problem-solving solution occurs. Something else just to kind of keep in mind is that we want to make sure that the solution is ethical, that it's safe, that it's responsible. And so that going to the next slide, basically, with the problem-solving process, one of the main factors of that is gathering information, because without that, we can't really work towards solving our problem. In gathering information, there's many methods out there for gathering information. Some of these can include some form of interview, focus groups, maybe surveys, assessments, questionnaires, as well as making direct observations if that's an option for the particular problem that we're working on. But once the information's been gathered, the next step, though, is to analyze it and identify the accuracy of the organizational information that's provided and the information collected from multiple sources. So a good recommendation is to kind of prioritize this information. And you can use a tool like Stephen Covey's matrix here. It separates information based on its importance and urgency. So as we can kind of see here in quadrant 1, it's both considered important and urgent. Quadrant 2 is important but not urgent. Quadrant 3, not important but still urgent. And quadrant 4, not important and not urgent. Quadrant 4 can kind of be thought of as that extra noise when we're gathering that data, things that aren't really going to apply to our problem and isn't really going to help with a solution, but that still gets gathered with all the other information. So for example, issues could arise when conducting, let's say, a needs assessment. If the issue being looked at turns out to be a symptom of a larger problem rather than really the root problem, like I mentioned earlier with the example of the work group, and it turned out that it wasn't the new person coming on that was causing conflict in the group. It was a symptom, but not necessarily the root cause. So addressing a symptom might alleviate it for a while, but eventually a new or recurring symptom will probably emerge, and it could be due to the original fundamental problem. So the fundamental problem could act as a source for more symptomatic problems to kind of branch off from that. So that's why it's important to properly identify the problem and not just the symptom in any kind of gaps in performance or any other gaps that we're seeing in our business. So one suggestion is working to kind of recognize the root cause or causes, because sometimes there's more than one, for a situation before deciding how or if something, let's say like training, could actually make a difference. So I'll give you an example from a client I worked with. It was found that the performance gap identified in the needs assessment was mainly due to a lack of implementing innovative solutions to problems. And now this was a business that relied heavily on being innovative in their approach to maintain their competitive advantage, since they were a much smaller company than many other businesses in their industry. Creativity is a necessary precursor, really an antecedent to innovation. And over the course of the needs assessment, I found that it had slowly eroded over the years. So through the course of discovery, I found that this likely occurred due to the implementation of several general policies over the span of several years. Now, these policies were designed to close other gaps in employee performance. Maybe people were showing up late or, but basically these policies were put in place to try to close gaps in the employee's performance. However, these policies inadvertently opened a gap in employees' ability to be creative. And it did that by reducing a lot of the freedom and autonomy that the employees had previously enjoyed. So we need to be aware of that as we're gathering information, where that information is coming from, whether it's the root cause or just a symptom of the problem. To kind of help us with that, we're going to look at Kepner-Tragoe process, problem analysis. Now, this is based on the work of Dr. Charles Kepner and Dr. Benjamin Tragoe. They're two researchers who conducted a study on breakdowns in decision-making at the Strategic Air Command. They found that successful decision-making by Air Force officers had less to do with seniority or career path and a lot more to do with the thinking process of gathering, organizing, and analyzing the information. So their basic premise is that organizations can learn to think clearly. Now, organizations, businesses, they're made up of people. And we know people can learn, so it just makes sense that, yes, businesses can also learn. As you can see on the slide here, situational analysis is kind of where are we? Where is your organization at right now? So different tasks are going to involve different problems. And in turn, they're going to need different approaches. A situational analysis can help clarify the distinctions in all of these processes. And as a result, it'll also be possible to learn, or rather to search for, suitable solutions. This type of situation analysis, it's going to provide insights into into basically necessity or priority, the urgency of the various tasks. Like we had discussed just previously, you can use something like Covey's matrix to kind of help you decide on the urgency and importance of the various tasks. When you get a clear understanding of what tasks need to be prioritized, you can then prepare to make, well, rather preparations can be made to solve the potential problems. So we really need a good problem analysis, and we need to use that in advance. A process will be created then to hopefully prevent future problems, or in emergencies, kind of mitigate and limit the damage they might do. With problem analysis, we define the problem, we specify it, we identify it, and then we identify differences and changes. And we also formulate and come up with possible causes. And then we try to actually test those causes against facts to try to prove our root cause, what's actually causing the problem. Excuse me. Decision analysis is kind of, it discusses and describes and classifies and objectives. So it kind of weights those objectives and determines which ones are needed, which ones are more important. It also allows us to kind of generate alternatives, evaluate those alternatives, and try to evaluate the risks involved as well, which then kind of leads us to making a decision. With potential problem analysis, we identify potential problems, and we also identify the causes, and we take preventative action. And we also plan basically contingency plans. We have backups to our plans, because no matter how perfect we create a plan, how carefully we lay it out, inevitably something doesn't go quite right. So regardless of how much information is available, people still might find processing that information a challenge. They could misinterpret it, they could overlook certain important aspects, and that's why having a model or system in place can help. Now, I've just given a couple of examples of these systems, but really there's a lot out there, and honestly, I would say use the one that you're most comfortable with. Try a few out and see which one you like the best. So when it comes to solving problems creatively, sometimes we can have mental blocks. We can kind of block ourselves from really being as creative as we could be. And there's a few common causes to these. So we're just going to go through these kind of quickly, but they're on your screen, so you can refer back to them. But mental blocks can sometimes slow or even completely stall the progress of coming up with some viable solution, something that would work really well. So one of the first steps to overcoming mental blocks is to simply recognize them, hence the list. So some common causes of mental blocks, as you can see, include defining the problem too narrowly, assuming there's just one right answer, or getting hooked on the first solution that comes to mind. Trying to get by with a solution that almost works, but not quite. I think of this as, it's not really a square peg trying to fit in a round hole, or a round peg fitting in a square hole. It's more like a slightly too big square trying to fit in a slightly too small square hole. It almost works, but it just doesn't quite. And we got to be able to let that go in order to move on to one that fits perfectly, or at least much better. Also, being distracted by irrelevant information. We kind of discussed that earlier. Sometimes we get a lot of information coming in, and we have to weed through that and kind of determine what's going to apply and what's not. And then the last one is kind of being too anxious to finish. We want to get that done, and that's all we can think about. Sometimes that can actually cause us to not see some of the solutions, or not be as creative as we could be. I don't have them listed here, but just keep in mind also that emotional blocks can sometimes also interfere with a person's ability to solve problems. It can decrease the amount of freedom that a person has to explore and kind of play around with ideas. And it can also interfere with their ability to kind of conceptualize fluidly and flexibly when they're discussing their ideas with other people. Um, a few of these just might include like fear of risk taking or being uncomfortable with uncertainty. Sometimes we like things to be certain and we feel very uncomfortable when we move outside of our kind of realm of expertise. Also perceived lack of challenge or maybe even thinking a problem's unsolvable. These can all kind of create these emotional blocks for us that keep us from being as creative as we could be. So with that in mind, how can we improve our creativity? Um, Again, are these surefire ways? No. But these are ways that might actually help you generate new ideas. So the first one is just kind of keep track of your ideas. Um, Often ideas are going to come up at unexpected times. And a lot of times if an idea isn't written down within sometimes the first few minutes, but certainly within the first day, a lot of times we forget it and we're like, what was that? I know it was good. Me personally, some people I know carry notebooks. I personally send myself texts on my phone or just open up the um, WordPad and just kind of jot down the idea when I think about it. So keep that in mind. Try to keep track of your ideas when they occur. And then be open and receptive to ideas. Now this includes both your own ideas, but other people's as well. So innovation, or rather innovative solutions, don't very often arrive complete with everything ready to be implemented. Wouldn't that be nice? Instead, new ideas are sometimes kind of fragile. They might keep, in order to kind of keep them from breaking, we can kind of um, take these half-formed concepts and possibilities and kind of nurture them and develop them into viable solutions. The next one is learn to know and understand yourself. Um, Knowing yourself can be one of the best ways of really improving your creativity. So work on things that can develop your self-knowledge, and that means learning your strengths, but also your weaknesses, any of your skills, things that you like, maybe areas that you feel that you make biased decisions in. Biases are a fact of life. We all have them. Being aware of them can sometimes help us mitigate that influence that they have over our lives. Similarly, kind of know your expectations, know what your fears are, and really kind of stay current in your field. All of those can kind of aid in creativity. Continual learning, read blogs, trade journals, books, anything else you can find in your field, even talking to other people in your field. Just make sure that you're not going to be using yesterday's technology to try to solve today's problems. Keep it light and find humor. It's been well researched that people are more creative when they're relaxed. Humor can really aid in putting both our problems and ourselves kind of in perspective. Um, Sometimes we get caught up in the moment and we think that things are a lot more serious than they necessarily need to be. So a lot of times it can help relieve tension, and it can also make the people around us feel more relaxed. Learn about things outside of your specialty. So we talked about learning about things in your specialty, but also, don't be afraid of kind of cross-fertilizing your ideas and concepts. Bring them from one field to another, or share your insights with another field. So just kind of don't be afraid to branch out. Read something new. This next one's kind of one of my favorite ones. I just like the image it brings up. Be a paradigm pioneer. So assume that you will that you have the ability and that you will solve the problem as it was described. Don't be afraid to take a risk. Persist and really have that kind of tenacity to overcome obstacles that kind of block our solution pathways. And then that kind of leads into the next one, which is adopt a risk-taking attitude. Now, fear of failure can be one of the major impediments to generating solutions, especially ones that are risky and might even have a small chance of succeeding, but ones that would have a really big impact if they were successful. So outlining the ways you could kind of fail maybe, ways that it might not work out, and then how would you deal with those failures? That might reduce that obstacle to creativity. And some ways, to practice risk-taking is just challenging established patterns of either doing business in your organization or just the way you normally do things. But it could also be something in our personal lives too. We could try a new sport, try a new craft. We can, I don't know, sing, volunteer for some either organizational group activity or maybe volunteer for a group outside of your organization. So I'm kind of thinking about that. Keep in mind these concepts as we kind of move into the next part. The next part is a little more strategic in its element, but that doesn't mean that we can't be creative when we're thinking about these. Okay, so strategic workforce planning. As you can see, really the purpose of workforce planning is to anticipate and respond to the needs emerging within and outside of the organization. And we do that to determine the priorities and to allocate resources where they can really do the most good. Now there's 4 primary areas of workforce planning. And that includes the ones listed here, and I'm just going to briefly go through them, and then we're going to get a little deeper into them in the next slides. So talent inventory. This is used to assess current resources and also to really analyze the current use of our employees. Now resources are going to include things like knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics of the employees. Other characteristics can be wide and varied. It might be the potential somebody has. It might be their general disposition or attitude. There's a lot of these different factors that will be considered for a talent inventory, but the ones that are considered are going to be usually differ from one organization to the next. Workforce forecast. That's used to predict future HR requirements. So it'll use things like numbers, skills mix, internal versus external labor supply and demand. Then action plans, that's used to really enlarge the pool of qualified individuals by recruitment or selection, training, placement, promotion, development, even compensation. And then the last one, control and evaluation. This is used to provide a closed loop feedback to the rest of the system, and it'll monitor it'll monitor how closely we come to attaining these HR goals and objectives. All right, so why do strategic planning? Some of the reasons, and probably the most fundamental reason for planning, is that it does lead to success. Now, I want to make a note here. Planning does not always lead to success, but studies consistently show that people who plan consistently outperform those who do not plan. So planning does lead to success more often. Planning can really assist businesses and organizations in coping with change. And that's a big part of why we plan. It can also provide managers, department heads, organizations in general with a sense of being in control of really the outcome of their efforts. You know, we don't want to leave something like that to chance. Planning requires defining our overall objectives. So what this does is it kind of provides some much needed context, meaning, and direction. And this is for both employees, their work, and the business itself. Through defining and ensuring all employees understand the overall goals, or in other words, why they're doing what they're being asked to do, employers can effectively kind of tie what the employees are doing, like their tasks, for example, to the business's overall objectives. And you know, there's a lot of research to back up that the process of defining objectives usually leads to a clearer and better employee performance and overall satisfaction. And lastly, it's not possible to achieve goals and maintain any semblance of control without objectives. So here we're talking about controlling the planning, not necessarily the individuals involved. However, planning can occur over different levels or over different timeframes. So what are the payoffs? And by far, the biggest payoff from strategic planning is its emphasis on growth. It encourages managers and leaders to really look for new opportunities instead of just relying on you know, either cutting workers to reduce expenses or cutting corners. It's really about looking for new opportunities. So caution should really be exercised here, though, since conventional approaches to strategic planning may sometimes lock an organization into a particular vision of the future. And it's one that might not ever actually happen. So the dilemma here is really how to effectively plan for the future when it can change so rapidly, as we're all very aware. One way is to ensure the planning process includes a wide range of people from every area of an organization. The people in charge will then need to listen and be prepared to shift their plans sometimes, possibly even just midway, you know, halfway through the planning process, if conditions really make it necessary to do so. So instead of transferring strategic planning to a separate staff or group, include a wider range of people in the process. And this can also lead to a deeper understanding of what the business is really trying to accomplish. Okay, so there's a lot of information on this slide. There was a lot of things that I wanted to put in here, and a lot of things I didn't, but hopefully this will kind of give you an idea of kind of what it's about. I'll go through some of these, but realistically, what a talent inventory, it's needed to really establish an effective workforce planning system. It's basically going to be, you can think of this like a database of the existing skills, abilities, career interests, and experience of the current workforce. Now, smaller businesses or organizations might find this very simple to put together, while larger organizations may have to devote a little more time and effort. So you see here questions to ask. Now, answers to these types of questions are going to provide both the direction and really the scope to future efforts in working on in managing our workforce. So although it's quite possible secondary or alternative uses of this data may emerge as we're gathering it, it's really important to specify the primary use at kind of that conceptual and development stage. This will provide some direction and scope regarding both who and what types of data should be included. So some common uses of talent inventories are identification of candidates for promotion, succession planning, assignments to special projects, maybe training, workforce diversity planning, compensation planning, career planning, and things like organizational analysis. So just one final note for our talent inventory is to be sure to include a clear statement about employee privacy safeguards, and as well as the potential impact on employee privacy for any comparable or equivalent in-house system you might be using. People's privacy and our safeguards to protect that privacy is very important. All right, so when we come to workforce, forecasting workforce, supply and demand, I'm gonna break these up into 2 slides though. They're gonna be discussed separately because the forecasts of demand and supply each depend on a different set of variables and assumptions. Workforce forecasts attempt to estimate future labor requirements. Relatively simple in concept, not necessarily in practice. So there's 2 primary parts or components to this process. The first one is anticipating supply of human resources, both inside and outside the organization. And it's usually for some defined future time period. And number 2 is anticipating organizational demand for the different types of employees. Now, I want to talk very briefly about a couple of paradoxes in workforce forecasts. So the first paradox is that the techniques are basically simple and relatively easy to describe. You guys will probably understand what I'm talking about if you don't already, but successfully implementing them can be enormously complex and challenging. So that's paradox number 1. The second paradox is that after a forecast has been done, it may actually be most useful when it seems less accurate as a vision of the future. Now that's going to require a little explanation. So here's what I mean by that. Assume that a particular forecast is pointing towards some future HR problem. Let's say that we have a surplus of middle managers with comparable skills who were hired at the same time to meet some sudden expansion that we were going through. Now the forecast might be most useful if it stimulates action, such as appropriate training, promotion, etc., so that the surplus never actually develops. So it's useless only if the surplus actually develops on schedule as projected. So this is probably the main value of workforce forecasts as well. In themselves, they're little more than kind of an academic exercise. But when they're actually integrated into the total planning process, they take on a really special value because they enable an organization to extend the range of other phases of workforce planning, as well as planning for other functions. The external workforce supply here for that we're looking at, it looks at the external labor market for the kinds of employees that are going to be needed in the future. Now, of course, this is going to vary from one organization to the next, from one industry to another, but it's important to gauge both the future supply of workers in a particular field and the future demand of these workers. Internal workforce supply. The current workforce of a business or organization can really provide a base to project future supply. It's a form of risk management, basically. So, for example, maybe an organization finds that something like 75% of employees in various operation critical positions are eligible for retirement. Now, of course, the organization really wants to hold on to those specialized skills that these individuals have because, well, they're critical. In this instance, a forecast can prompt actions to really ensure that those deficits don't ever actually materialize. And one of the ways of doing that is through leader succession planning. So leadership succession planning is often considered to be really a primary focus of workforce planning. The actual procedure for developing such a plan can include steps like setting a planning perspective, assessing current performance and maybe readiness for a promotion. One of the worst things we can do sometimes is promote somebody before they're ready, and then they sometimes flounder. Another step is identifying replacement candidates for each key position and doing that early on, as early as possible, as well as identifying career development needs, integrating career goals of individuals with organizational goals, and ensuring training is available for those that are interested. Okay, forecasting workforce demand. This tends to be much more subjective, and that's due primarily because there's a lot of uncertainties regarding trends and events. Right now, especially, those trends and events have kind of, we don't know exactly what's coming for a workforce demand. So the current situation we're all experiencing, I think, is a good indication, and I'm sure everyone can relate, that there's a lot of unknown factors. Again, it doesn't mean that we can't plan for that, or at least be aware of things that might help us kind of mitigate that or reduce some of the impact those have. Pivotal jobs drive strategy and revenue, and they tend to distinguish an organization really in its field. Pivotal jobs are jobs that are critical for the running of a business or organization, and they're really considered high impact positions. So possible categories can include strategic, core, maybe required, non-core, but it's really going to depend on the industry and the organization. In assessing future workforce demands, we can really tap the collective knowledge of managers, especially line managers. But in addition to that, we can also tap other subject matter experts to help determine reasonable estimates of numbers of skill mixes that people are going to be needing over some specified period of time. Let's say, we're planning on the next 1 to 2 years. So an example would then be some example questions that you might ask these line managers or subject matter experts would be something like, what are the required knowledge, skills, and abilities needed to execute the strategy? Or what are the most critical workforce issues we currently face? And you'll see at the bottom of the page there is a link. Takes you to the ONET. It's a government run site, and it really provides a lot of information on different jobs, and it'll break down jobs into these areas, the knowledge, skills, experience, abilities that are needed for each of those. So I encourage everyone to take a look at that if as they're working through their workforce planning, to kind of get an idea of what those skills and abilities might look like. Okay, so let's say we forecasted everything. So now what? Well, now we try to integrate the supply and the demand. So if forecasts are going to prove really useful, they have to result in some sort of end product that's both understandable and meaningful. So what we're looking for with forecasting is not necessarily stacks of printout, lots of data. Instead, what we're really looking for is some concise statements of what projected staffing requirements are going to look like, what we're going to need to really integrate both the supply and the demand forecast. And what this will do is this will allow for better informed decisions regarding the future direction of any other HR initiatives that might be being implemented. All right, action plans. Talent inventories and forecasts help identify workforce needs, which in turn provides meaning in operations and direction for action plans. Action plans are going to be useful in a lot of different areas, such as recruitment, selection, placement, transfer, performance management, training, pretty much any career enhancement activities. So action plans are going to greatly assist organizations in adapting to changes, both that occur internally in their organization and externally due to environments occurring outside of the business. So an important question is to select workers who already possess the necessary skills to perform competently, or to select individuals who may not immediately have the skills, but who can be trained to perform at a similar level. So this is similar to the make or buy decisions that organizational leaders and managers face in a lot of other areas of their business and organization. So general guidelines for determining when buying, that is selecting, is more effective than making, in this case training, include how accurate is your forecast demand. If it's not very accurate, do more buying, well, selecting. Do you have the resources to develop? If not, do more selection. If there's a promotion-based system, is there a promotion-based system to draw talent from? If not, you guessed it, do more selection. And how long will the talent be needed? If you don't need it very long, again, selection is going to be the key for that. And do you want to change the culture or direction of your organization? If yes, do more selection. So overall, it's often more cost effective, as you probably noticed, to put more money and resources into selection first. So we strive first to really develop the most accurate and valid selection process possible. In the long run, it will yield higher ability workers. Then apply the action plans most appropriate to increase the performance of the employees further. Now, high ability or high performing employees are going to commonly produce better gains from the same training program than lower ability employees. It's just kind of the way it is. So moving into control and evaluation, here we have, these are procedures that are required to provide feedback to workforce planning. It allows it allows feedback to be given to the workforce planning system, but also to monitor the level of attainment of HR goals and objectives. So the primary function of control and evaluation is to really guide the workforce planning activities over time by identifying any deviations from the plan, as well as any possible causes. And this ties back to the first part of the presentation on creative problem solving. The most effective control system is going to include periodic sampling and measuring of performance. And now there's a lot of different monitoring procedures. Just a couple might include turnover costs or break even and payback for new hires. Now these numbers are usually tracked and are easily obtainable. If they're not, you may want to consider to start tracking them. But I think most people probably track these already. Another source is managers' perceptions. You can get these by surveys or auditing the organizational climate, as well as measuring and analyzing the costs of variations. Basically, the variation in costs under alternative decisions. Like, for example, what's the cost of recruiting versus internal development of our current employees? Businesses and organizations never have an infinite supply of any resource. And I know I'm not telling anybody anything new here. That includes people, capital, information, materials. So it's really important to not only anticipate the future, but also to try and actively influence it. Success in workforce planning is going to revolve around the quality of the action plans established to really help achieve HR objectives and on the organization's ability to successfully implement these programs. Managing problems in alignment with a plan can be challenging, I'm certainly not saying it isn't, but I guarantee you it'll be a lot easier than managing problems without any kind of plan at all. Okay, we're going to move on to the question and answer portion. Give me just a second here, and I'll bring up my camera, and you can see me. Hello. Oops.
Okay, so Eric, one of the things I want to let everybody know, this is Maria, in relation to the workforce planning that Eric spoke about, if you contact our office at the 620-417-1955, our team will be happy to assist you in workforce action plans and be able to provide you with some templates that will help you to utilize the information that Eric has provided here. So a lot of what you've heard today is part of a structure that helps your business to move forward. And while some of it may seem complicated in the sense that you've never had to do this before, we want you to know that our team is there to help you walk through this process. It's just like in the beginning when you did your business plan and you had to do that forecast and you had to look at the big picture. We're working through the same processes here as we go through this whole situation with COVID-19. And it's changed the dynamics of how we do business. And we're not entirely sure what the new normal is going to look like. But we want you to know that we're here to help provide that guidance to you. So if you are interested in any type of template or looking for that step-by-step walkthrough of how to put this application or this theory into application, please don't hesitate to contact us either directly via email or at our contact number on the screen. We're here for you. All of the SBDCs throughout the state of Kansas have wonderful qualified individuals who are there to walk you through anything that you may have questions on. And if we don't know the answer, we will definitely reach out and find it for you. Thank you everyone for participating. If you have any questions, you can either you can post into the Q&A. Our website for the Kansas SBDC will have the copy of the actual webinar, the recording, as well as the slides, and that will probably be posted in the next 48 hours if you'd like to go back and capture any of the information here. Eric, it says, is there a way for a lower level employee who isn't responsible for hiring decisions to still use the concepts in workforce planning to assist their organization?
Absolutely. I'm a firm believer that you don't have to be in charge in an organization to be a leader in an organization. Now, there's some things that really need to be, in order to be successful, it's going to need to be generated at the organizational level. But initially, lower level employees could certainly bring this to their manager's attention or whoever they report to, and at the same time still use some of the problem solving steps as well as the workforce planning concepts to really assist their organization as much as possible. But the workforce planning specifically, besides bringing it to their attention, encouraging other people to ask for it as well, that's something that really should be generated at the organizational level.
Okay, thank you, Eric.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right, it doesn't look like we have any other questions, so to be respectful of everybody's time. Oh, wait a minute. When prioritizing important tasks, would you recommend writing them out daily, weekly, monthly?
I think to some extent that's going to depend on how important the tasks are and how urgent they are. If they are both If they're very urgent and very important, probably daily would be a lot better. If there's something that maybe only occurs once a month, it's something that maybe you could do a month in advance. So some of that's going to depend a little bit on what the tasks are, and whether or not it's something that needs to be done sooner or later. So some of that's going to depend on when that's happening, what the tasks are, and how urgent they are.
You know, I'd like to add something to that. The SBDC has a program called Time Management, and it's a training seminar we did in Dodge City the beginning of 2019. And we follow, I'm a Franklin Covey trained individual. So what Eric presented here in the beginning about, the 7 habits of highly effective people, our time management program actually goes through utilizing Covey's principles. And, it addresses just what Eric said, depending upon your style of work, your what is most comfortable for you. We have programs that can actually teach you that whole process. And if you're interested, feel free to give us a call or email one of us, and we'll be happy to give you some of those tools. Again, it's a very personal thing when we talk about how we prioritize not only our work life, but our personal life. And, some of us are a little obsessive about it, while others are just trying to learn those processes. So do reach out to us, because we do have more tools to help you in that area. Okay. Well, Eric, it looks like that's all the questions we have. We're going to go ahead and close this out. We do have another episode of this next week on the 29th at 9 a.m. So please feel free to pass this along for other folks or other businesses who might need this information. Again, reach out to us if you have further questions, and thank you all for attending. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, everyone.